Alina pulls her brother by the hand and urges him to follow her. Jamal spreads his arms out to the sides and asks the girl to wait for the show. Alina, tugging her brother away, declares that she will not wait for anything in such a place. Islin looks over his shoulder at his sister and asks why she is so tough and if she's doing something. Alina asks again in surprise. One of the bodyguards blocks the little girl's path. He calls out to her. The rogue, clearly nervous, asks the girl to wait. Alina looks at him in astonishment and calls him by name. Jamal and Philip stand next to the hero and his sister, not letting them pass. The girl says that the bodyguards seem very odd and asks what is happening to them. Jamal, rubbing the back of his head, says that they did not mean to frighten their masters. A vile grin appears on his face. He says that they are just carrying out one good command. Alina looks at the scoundrel in shock and asks again, "We see someone's leg." 3 men in long coats approach the conversation. One of them, in glasses and a hat, praises his partners for their neat work. It is revealed that Frank is in front of us. Jamal approaches the shady people and says that as agreed, they brought the young lady, then he offers to finish the deal. Frank looks at the hero and asks if this is the eldest son of the Perdium family. He says that he did not request him. The sister, scared, clings to her brother's hand. Jamal, smiling joyfully, declares that this is a bonus that came along with them to his own harm. Ghislaine, whose back we can see, says that Jamal seems to be about to sell the girl he is supposed to guard. He asks if the villain is sure he can escape with it. He, grinning, looks at the hero and advises him to worry about his own safety since he and his friend will now flee to where no one will find them. In front of us is the Perdium castle with the nearby lands. Jamal declares that he is already quite tired of these poor territories, and besides, he does not like the savage raids at all. Putting his hands forward, he reminds that everyone has been fleeing from the Perdium lands for a long time. Island strikes suddenly with his sword and hits the rogue right in the chest. Blood gushes from Jamal's mouth. Philip looks in shock at what happened to his partner. Frank is also quite stunned. Jamal, cut in half, lies before the hero. The guy says that those who escape at least do not trade in other people's lives. He glares fiercely at the second bodyguard and asks him to confirm these words. Philip, who is holding the girl tightly, shouts at his dead partner how a knight like him could let this weakling near him and calls his colleague a fool. The next second, a sword is thrust into the rogue's forehead. Philip finally says that this is simply unbelievable. Alina clings to her brother. One of the villains standing behind Frank asks if their leader is sure that this is the eldest son of the Perdium family. The second states that as far as he knows, this young man not only does not know how to battle, but has never even practiced. Frank, looking at the guy through his glasses, says that, judging by his appearance, it was all Ghislaine. The scoundrel thinks that the bodyguards, of course, are to blame for being distracted, but in order to slay 2 knights so quickly, you need to have a certain talent. Frank recalls how the guy destroyed his sister's bodyguards. He realizes that mana was clearly used in the young man's attack. Alina presses herself against her brother and asks him what's happening. Ghislaine is silent. The hero hits his sister on the neck with a swift movement. He lowers her to the ground and tells her to rest a little. Frank thanks the guy for doing the work for them. Ghislaine looks at the enemies over his shoulder. The villains stand over the bodies of the bodyguards. Their leader says that they themselves were planning to get rid of Jamal and Philip. The man says that the young man is not at all what they say about him. Frank puts a pipe in his mouth and asks if the guy is hiding his true abilities from everyone. Ghislaine takes out his sword and asks what the rogue cares about this. Spinning the sword in front of him, the hero thinks about how he will have to fight 3 foes at once. A blue aura is visible around Frank. The hero realizes that the other 2 fighters are nothing special, but the leader emits an unusual amount of mana, so he needs to deal with all this as soon as possible. White threads appear around the young man's hand. Standing in front of his enemies, the young man asks, "Who is the customer?" Frank calmly asks why this information is needed by someone who will soon perish. Ghislaine says that he did not even doubt that the rogue in front of him would try to conceal this very useful knowledge. The guy puts his sword in front of him and promises Frank that he will force him to tell him everything he wants to know. One of Frank's henchmen takes out a weapon and asks his boss if he needs to twist the bold guy's head off. The boss replies that the hero needs to be taken alive in order to break his arms and legs and make him go mad from weakness. The rogue looks at the hero over his glasses and declares that, in order to create a masterpiece, he needs to learn a lesson in pain. His henchmen make it clear that they will carry out the command and rush to attack. The hero's eyes emit a white glow. He throws a saber with a lit fuse at the enemies. The attacker to whom this object flies realizes what it is. The saber explodes right in front of the rogue's face. The next second, the hero's sword plunges into his forehead. The second henchman tries to hit. He asks, "What kind of tricks are these?" The hero protects his back with a sword. We see the young man's eye. The enemy looks at the guy in confusion, who makes a quick movement with his hand, holding the enemy's sword under his armpit. Ghislaine pulls it out. The young man strikes and cuts off the villain's head. The hero senses danger coming from behind. Frank strikes and seems to hit the young man in the back. It turns out that Ghislaine managed to block this strike as well. Frank, still holding his pipe, looks at his opponent. He does not understand how he was able to stop the attack, which came from a blind spot. Ghislaine rests his foot on the ground and leans slightly toward his opponent. The hero strikes and hits the enemy's neck. He cuts the pipe that was in the scoundrel's mouth. The smoking item falls to the ground. Ghislaine looks at the opponent. Frank strikes, but the boy blocks it with two swords at once. Frank, smiling, declares that he is very impressed, and if he did not have mana, he would already be headless. Elin, gritting his teeth from the effort, looks at the enemy and tries to figure out how he managed to survive a direct hit to the neck. The only explanation is that he focused mana around that part of his body to lessen the damage. We see the rogue's hands. He says that he has no clue where the boy got such remarkable skills from at such a young age, but further growth is impossible because the boy is about to die. The rogue grins wickedly, looking at the hero. Frank strikes the hero, who is defending himself with blades, and says that with such a tiny supply of energy, he will not beat him. Smiling from the breadth of his huge mouth, the villain yells that Ghislaine will perish here. A grin appears on the hero's face. Frank notices it and starts to suspect something awful. Ghislaine blocks the strike and his blades sink into the earth. It seems like Frank has taken a strong hit to the head. The rogue leaps back, adjusts his cap, and claims that with such a small amount of energy as his foe, none of this will succeed. Blood pours from Frank's mouth. He falls to one knee and spits out the blood that has gathered in his mouth. The villain is trembling all over. He cannot grasp what occurred because Ghislaine did not strike that forcefully. The rogue does not comprehend how he managed to pierce his spell with such a low level of energy. Ghislaine approaches the scoundrel and says that he never even considered that there was a true plot behind Alina's death. Continuing to advance toward the foe with a blade in his hand, he asks if this is his work. The hero glares fiercely at the villain and warns that now he will feel great agony. It is revealed that Ghislaine's third core is unleashed. Gnashing his teeth in fury, Frank looks at the youth and does not understand where he could have gained such a vast amount of energy. Ghislaine hits the foe's head with both sword handles at once. The right lens of the villain's glasses breaks. Frank notes the foe's incredible swiftness. The hero lands multiple strikes. His enemy tries to shield himself. The youth raises his blade for another strike. Frank blocks the attack, holding his weapon in front of him. The villain's hands tremble from the effort. He thinks that this is simply unthinkable. He does not sense his limbs, doing nothing but maintaining the defense. We see that the villain's blade has cracked. Frank thinks that it does not matter how much energy is stored in a person. Its impact is always restricted. The fight continues. Frank thinks that he has never witnessed a method in his life that would unleash energy in such potent streams. The same hero is seen above his head, but in a former life. Frank feels that he is a totally different individual. The villain's blade shatters into fragments after another strike. Frank leans back, raising both hands. Blood spurts from his chest. Gritting his teeth in rage, Ghislaine raises his weapon for another attack. The youth thrusts his blade into the foe's chest. He opens his mouth wide and screams loudly in pain. The youth hits the villain with his hand on the jaw. Ghislaine pins the rogue to the wall and suggests they continue the talk. Having plunged the blade into the villain's stomach, the young man asks who commanded him to do this. A small throwing dagger appears in Frank's hand. The villain thinks that he will not surrender so easily. He glances at Alina lying nearby and thinks that he will drag her with him to the tomb. Frank swings his arm to toss the tiny weapon. However, his hand is caught in red threads. Pressing the villain's head to the wall, Ghislaine asks, "What about the agreement?" Angrily staring at the foe, the youth demands that he not do foolish things and answer the queries. He promises to remove the blade in this case. Shaking with strain, Frank tries to figure out if the threads that bind him are made of energy. The villain cannot fathom when the youth managed to release them. The hero's hand is tangled in white threads. Ghislaine presses on the blade and says that such an experienced fighter will be able to heal from his injuries. There is no question about it. The young man glares fiercely at the villain and declares that if he destroys the monarchor, everything will be finished. The villain asks again, his mouth slightly open. A glowing disc is visible around the hero's blade. Frank looks down in astonishment where powerful sparks are flashing near his stomach. The core splits. Frank realizes that his energy is fading. The villain looks at the hero and shouts that he has lost his mind. He warns that one wrong move and the energy that escapes will destroy everything. He asks the youth if he is really going to perish. Ghislaine replies that this can only happen to beginners. Calmly gazing at the foe, Ghislaine says that he will manage in any situation. Frank looks at his rival in amazement and realizes that he is not bluffing. A skull is visible in the young man's eyes. Frank understands that he is about to die. The villain opens his mouth wide and screams that Count Desmond is behind all of this. Ghislaine continues to press the villain's head against the wall, who screams frantically that it was this man who ordered the killing of the boy's sister. Count Desmond said that he needed an event that would spark a war between the houses of Pertium and Dard. Ghislaine, looking sternly at the foe, thinks that it means Desmond is behind all of this. We see a group of people in cloaks and hoods. Ghislaine recalls that in his past life, all the dirty tasks were dumped on the family allied with the Duke. He mentally asked Duke Delphine how he dared to orchestrate this scheme from behind the scenes. Pressing on the villain's neck, Ghislaine asks if this is why they needed his sister's death. Frank says that this is precisely why. The young man presses hard on the blade. Frank, with his mouth wide open, asks what the hero is doing since he promised not to kill him. The villain starts coughing. Ghislaine, smiling, looks at the foe and asks why he is so shocked since he himself has slain many people, and when it was his turn to die, he simply wets his trousers. Ghislaine watches his enemy's demise. Gritting his teeth in fury, Frank declares that his death will not alter anything, since the issue with the guard has been successfully settled. The villain asks if the youth really expects people to trust him since they consider the young man a completely useless person. The hero places his hand on the villain's face, who manages to say that soon, the Pertium house will also be pulled into the war. Continuing to cover the enemy's vile face with his hand, Ghislaine asks for permission to clarify something. Resolutely looking into the villain's eyes, Ghislaine says that he was reborn after death, and this time, everything will be different. He plunges his blade to the hilt. Frank screams frantically. A cloud of energy is visible above the city buildings. A powerful flash occurs above the hero's head. Corpses are lying on the ground. The youth is breathing heavily. One of his sister's bodyguards lies with his mouth wide open. Ghislaine turns his head. He looks at his sister lying on the ground. The blade falls point down to the earth. Ghislaine, sighing heavily, raises his head. Blood is coming out of his mouth. The hero collapses to the ground. The youth wipes his mouth with his hand. He curses and says that using 3 cores was not an issue when he was the king of mercenaries. The young man vows to himself that he will not give up. Ghislaine notices the wooden door. He kicks it down and finds himself in a room where 2 bodies are lying in white sacks. Holding his stomach, Ghislaine examines the bodies. He says that in his former life not only his sister's body was found here but also another corpse. Recalling the words spoken by Frank, the hero guesses who lies here. A man stands in front of the family emblem. Ghislaine sees the face of the dead man and realizes that this is the guard's son. The hero squats next to the white sacks. He recalls that the youth was killed along with all the escort knights. The young man understands that this is how the attackers forced everyone to stay quiet and expose the victims as the girl's killers. So, Ghislaine decides to eliminate the evidence. The hero takes a saber out of his pouch. Having thrown his sister onto his shoulders, he leaves the burning building. The young man thinks that he will not let the attackers' plans succeed. A man in a dark cloak watches him from a branch of a tall tree. It seems that this figure is vanishing into thin air. Those sitting at the round table are questioning him. Someone says that it was a total failure since not only did Frank die on the mission but also the best knights, and they did not manage to remove even one girl. The defendant is asked whether he was nervous at all or very calm, expecting a very easy task. He is on one knee and tries to defend himself by saying that he had to face Ghislaine Pertium. The villain looks angrily from under his hood. One of the accusers clenches his fists and asks if this is really the same useless person. The face of this character is hard to see since it is hidden in the shadows. He states that everyone has long known that Ghislaine is an absolute nobody, and the defendant cites his presence as some kind of reason. The defendant, sweat dripping down his cheeks, claims that the boy was nothing like the rumors had described him as. The villain flashes back to the young man's actions during the fight with Frank and his henchmen, claiming that he was a completely different individual. The defendant looks at his accusers and tells them that the Dard mission was completed after all. So starting a regional war would be simple. He asks for just one opportunity. We dimly see part of the table. The accusers demand that the defendant be quiet, claiming that he is not even capable of gathering reliable information about one child. He is asked if he has any idea how much trouble this failure will cause in the future. Someone rightly remarks that the defendant failed the easiest mission and now requests a second opportunity. Those gathered at the table, gritting their teeth with anger, demand that the loser be removed. In the distance, another character sits on a throne. He says that it is too noisy here. This man's face is hidden in shadow. He asks the defendant what kind of opportunity he needs. The villain angrily declares that he will get rid of Ghislaine Perdium. He is asked how he plans to do this. He replies that it will be a one-on-one battle. The defendant, glaring from under his hood, says that he has one secret weapon. We see two accusers. One of them asks to explain what is being discussed. In front of us is a strong warrior and fragments of flying swords. The defendant says that this man is called Cain Les. He is famous for his powerful moves with a sword and is a true symbol of strength despite his young age. The villain says that he is sure that in all the North there is no one equal to this man in power. He states that on top of that, Cain is Ghislaine's cousin, so it won't be hard to turn them against each other. The men sitting at the table silently consider the defendant's words. The leader, whose face is hidden in shadow, states that if the defendant fails again, he will not have another opportunity. We see the man's yellow eye. The defendant shouts loudly that he will not disappoint his master. In front of us are massive stone buildings, reported to be the training hall of the Perdium mansion. Fergus stands at the door and apologizes to the young gentleman. He tells him that it is time for supper. We see bright white traces in the air. Fergus looks in amazement at the sword which suddenly appeared next to him. Another such weapon flies in the direction of the old man. Ghislaine holds the sword in his hand. He quickly spins both blades at once and tells himself that everything is fine. Surprise appears on the guy's face. He realizes that an old knight stands in front of him and greets him, who, bowing, apologizes for disturbing the hero's practice. Fergus looks at the young man in confusion and asks how he did it. Ghislaine looks at the sword hanging on a white thread and asks if this is the trick he means. We see his hand up close. The guy explains that he uses mono threads that allow him to hold various items. We are reminded of how the boy tied Frank, who had been killed earlier, with these threads. Ghislaine thinks that he used them often in his past life, but with his current skill level, he has to use all of his mana cores to use these threads. The boy happily looks at his hand, thinking that if he uses only one thread to save energy, he will be able to use this technique despite his mana shortage. Fergus looks at the hero's hand in surprise and states that he himself seems to be quite familiar with mana, but has never seen anything like this before. We see the lower part of the old man's face. He thinks that until recently, Ghislaine was unable to use mana at all, and it is completely unclear when this guy managed to come up with such amazing ways to use it. We see the walls of the training hall. Ghislaine asks what Fergus wanted. He replies that he needs to give the boy something. The hero looks closely at the old man and asks what exactly he is talking about. Fergus bows and thanks the guy for saving the young lady. We see the back of the hero's head. He asks why Fergus thanks him because he only did what he had to do. Then the young man suggests going to supper. In front of us is an impressive castle. We see the market square. It is reported that this is happening a few days later, and the festival was stopped to ensure Alina's safety. The girl is sitting at the table, resting her head on her hand. She angrily says that no one believes her when she says that her brother saved her. Ghislaine is sitting on the other side of the table. Alina asks him to go and tell everyone what happened. The young man says that no one will believe him either. Belinda, who is standing behind the girl, is beside herself with fury. She asks if Jamal and Philip really tried to steal the baby. The girl calls the bodyguards bastards and says that she always understood that they were some kind of creeps. The hero, smiling, looks at his sister. He understands that the girl is not saying much. We see a young man through the window. He is happy that the war has been avoided for a while, but he is sure that the enemies will not give up so easily. We see the profile of the young man. He thinks that he will not be able to stop the attackers since this will require an entire army. A servant with a cart enters the dining room. She asks for forgiveness from those present. The woman places food in front of the hero. He thinks that to get an army, he needs more strength. There is a piece of bread on the plate. Ghislaine looks at it in surprise. The guy looks at Belinda and asks why they served dessert right away. She replies that it is not dessert at all and asks him to remember the situation they found themselves in. People can be heard through the window, demanding payment. The bearded man, putting his hand to his mouth, screams loudly that he demands payment for the damage caused due to the cancellation of the festival. A crowd rages in front of the castle gates. They also demand payment. The angry man points at the guard and demands that he come outside. He claims that everyone inside is swimming in wealth. The warrior asks the protester to calm down. Aislinn looks out the window and asks what the heck is going on. Belinda looks at him in fear and says that she knew it would happen. The young man looks at the girl in surprise. Belinda touches her cheek with her fingers, reminding them that in their country, there are many merchants who live off the earnings of such festivals, and last year they made quite a lot of money. But now the event has been canceled just a day after it started, so they are very upset. We see angry people holding shovels, crutches, and other potentially dangerous objects. Ghislaine asks in surprise if the situation is really that bad. He shakes his head thoughtfully and thinks that if nothing is done, things will only get much worse. The guy looks at Fergus, standing next to him, and asks what the soldiers are doing. Then he tells the old man to order this crowd to be calmed. Fergus, squinting, replies that there are no soldiers yet. Ghislaine asks again in surprise. The old man replies that most of the army was sent to clear the forest of creatures that appeared there due to the increased attacks of orcs. We see a battle scene. Ghislaine cannot believe that all the soldiers were sent there. The map of the area shows the forest of creatures, Persham Castle, and the northern fortress. Ghislaine remembers that the lands of Persham are stuck in wars due to raids by barbarians from the north, and on the other side they have a forest full of creatures that can attack at any moment. The guy frowns at the fact that his family has neither soldiers nor wealth, and their lands are in complete chaos. He puts his arm around Belinda's shoulder and takes her aside, saying that they need to talk. Ghislaine, frowning at the upset girl, asks if she is in charge of his funds. Then he orders her to use the funds to calm the merchants. Belinda, surprised, tells him that there is no money. Ghislaine turns his head to the girl and asks why this happened. She reminds him that the Count ordered that no money should be given to the young man because he carelessly spends it on all sorts of nonsense. The hero, whose ear we see, realizes that he is completely broke. The guy extends his hand and asks the girl to lend him some money. She, smiling, replies that she has nothing either. Ghislaine, sitting on the windowsill, reflects on the fact that they have neither soldiers nor wealth. The guy wonders what they have left at all. The hero is very sad. He realizes that without money he will not be able to do anything, even if he has knowledge about the future. The young man understands that he must earn money somehow. Someone runs quickly. Ghislaine thinks that there is probably something in the estate that can bring wealth. A young man appears in the doorway of the room calling the young master. Ricardo kneels in front of the hero. He asks what is the matter and why such a hurry. The young man opens his mouth wide and shouts that they have a huge problem because Mr. Kane wants to see the guy. Ghislaine repeats the name he just heard in surprise. Skaven, who has a huge bruise under his eye, is breathing heavily. He receives a powerful blow to the left cheek. In front of us is a clenched fist. Someone continues to beat the old warrior. Blood spurts from Skaven's mouth. Ghislaine appears in the doorway, who sees the old man flying onto his back. Skaven, whose head is lying on the floor, notices the hero. The young man looks at what is happening before his eyes in surprise. In front of us is the hero's right eye. Someone says that he has finally seen it. Ghislaine sees a muscular torso in front of him. Its owner looks mockingly at the young man and greets him. Ghislaine frowns at his cousin. Next to him stands an unpleasant-looking accomplice. The hero thinks that he recalls the revolting face of his relative very well. 2 flags are visible above Kane's head. Ghislaine believes that in front of him is the successor of the Lois family with whom the boys' clan has an alliance. We see the faces of 2 young individuals. The hero reflects that in a past life Kane was his only friend, but in truth turned out to be a foe. Kane approaches the hero, at whose feet lies Skaven. Ghislaine frowns and asks Ricardo, who is standing behind him, what happened here. The lad, looking down in fear, says that some time ago they were told of trouble in the local tavern. Ricardo and Skaven approached Kane, who is sitting on a chair. The young fighter says that when they arrived there, they found Kane accompanied by knights, and this man began to question if the rumors about the young master Ghislaine were true. Kane empties his mug. Ricardo says that Skaven began to explain in detail about what occurred. Kane grabs the old man by the chin. He looks into the eyes of the seasoned warrior and asks how he dares to lie so boldly to the face of the heir of the Lois family. Ricardo, looking down, clarifies that all this later led to what the young man sees now. Kane, looking at Ricardo arrogantly, demands that he tell the whole truth if he started speaking. The hero's cousin declares that the old man claimed that Ghislaine, who never really practiced, defeated the orcs, and then hunted down the betrayers. Before us is a badly beaten old man. Kane says that he decided to use force to restore Skaven to the last of his sanity. Looming over the hero, the bully states that none of this would have happened if the guy hadn't spread falsehoods. Ghislaine glares at his cousin. We see the right side of the hero's face. He recalls that Kane was exactly like that and always treated him like his servant. Kane downs another mug and holds the hero by the hair. Ghislaine remembers that whenever this man visited the Perdium family's estate, he acted in the most disgraceful manner, and even when he went too far, no one scolded him for anything. The guy frowns at his cousin. He recalls that no one could look down on him. The guy stands sadly behind the muscular brute. Ghislaine remembers that in his past life he suffered from a lack of confidence and did not oppose his relative, perceiving Kane's boldness and arrogance as traits befitting a successor. Because of this, those around him criticize the guy even more. A smile appears on the hero's face. Kane looks at him in confusion. The scoundrel's gaze is haughty. He notices the oddities in the hero's behavior, whom he considers a worthless kid. In front of us is a house with a blue roof. It is reported that the action takes place in the Lois estate shortly before the current events. Kane looks closely at someone and asks in surprise if he really should kill Ghislaine. A man in a robe stands in front of him. He says that if the guy succeeds, then one honorable person will provide substantial aid to the Lois family. Kane, grinning, says that it is not a particularly tough task. It is just that Ghislaine is also the heir to his lands, and simply slaying him is hardly possible. The man in the dark cloak says that Kane should provoke the hero into a duel and then pretend that an accident happened. From the outside, it will look like a typical quarrel of heirs. He promises to go with the young man under the guise of an escort knight and provide help if something goes wrong. The man in the hood says that this is a great chance for Kane. The hero's cousin, whose back of his head we see, says that he could not even imagine that he would be ordered to slay a relative. The guy warms up his huge hands and says that they can begin this business right now. Thoughtfulness appears on the face of the brute. He tries to understand why someone wants to eliminate Ghislaine. He suggests that this is due to the fact that someone noticed some changes in the guy. The brute smiles. He asks Ghislaine what he is doing. The hero looks at his cousin, puzzled. Kane, sitting on the steps of a rundown tavern, asks the young man why he is standing still. Kane declares that he wants what is owed to him. Ghislaine asks again, puzzled, smiling. Kane looks at his cousin and says that his family ended the festival early, so he suggests livening things up and having a good time. The bully reminds that they have the same ideas about fun. We see the left eye of this man. He asks the hero what he thinks about this. Ghislaine stands with his hands in his pockets, looking at the bully. The guy asks if this is what he is talking about. The young man recalls that Kane, when coming to the Perdium domain, always demanded women and liquor. The cousins look at each other. Ghislaine turns away with a heavy sigh, remembering that in his past life he followed the orders of this scoundrel because he did not want to be beaten, but now everything is different and he is not going to spend his money on him. The young man remembers how Belinda reminded him that his father ordered not to give him money because he carelessly spends it on all sorts of nonsense. We see the face of the young man. The guy smiles. He thinks that the source of income has always been here. His cousin is reflected in the eyes of the young man. Ghislaine stands in front of his relative, who calls him, sitting on the steps. Kane tells the guy that if he understood what is being discussed, he should quickly bring everything here because he is waiting eagerly. Ghislaine promises that he will deliver everything right now. Kane looks closely at his cousin. He firmly declares that he will do this only after Kane pays the bills. The rogue accompanying the brute looks at the hero gloomily. Kane asks, annoyed, "What bills are they talking about?" Ghislaine, smiling, puts forward his right hand and says that he has been living in luxury at his expense all this time, and now it is time to settle, including the interest. The hero says that his relative owes 1,000 gold. He asks again in confusion and says that the guy probably spent no more than 100 on all this. Looking annoyed at his cousin, Kane says that in fact he treated a friend, so he can consider this a friendly favor. Ghislaine, whose shoulder we can see, says that it is quite hard to talk about friendship with Kane, who constantly disrespects him. Looking intently at his cousin, Ghislaine demands that he pay. He threatens to simply beat the debt out of him otherwise and says that he is in dire need of money now. A threatening silence reigns in the tavern. Ricardo looks at the boy and mentally asks his master what he's doing. Someone's foot falls to the floor. Kane towers over the hero. He says that he has always been kind to the boy and asks if that is why he decided that he can be bold with impunity. Kane looks fiercely into the eyes of the boy and says that he seems to truly believe that he has become stronger because he spread a few false stories about his victories. The brute clenches his fist. He raises his left hand to strike and says that now he will beat the face of his cousin. The hero's eyes are covered by hair. Kane throws a punch, but the boy dodges. Ricardo and the rogue accompanying Kane look at what is happening in surprise. Kane lands a couple of blows but misses again. The hero in turn hits the thug in the stomach. Blood drips from Kane's mouth. Ghislaine strikes with his elbow. Kane blocks another blow from the hero. He looks at his opponent in confusion. Kane falls to his knees in front of the guy and lets out a loud scream. The rogue accompanying the hero's cousin rushes to him and asks, "What happened to the master?" Ghislaine calmly looks at Kane and demands that he get up. He says that his cousin managed to block the blow, so he should not pretend. The man in the hood, grinning wickedly, demands that the hero step aside and asks what he is doing. The tavern patrons look at what is happening in confusion. Someone asks if Ghislaine was able to defeat Kane and wonders if anyone saw how it happened. The hero looks thoughtfully to his right. He smiles. It seems the guy understood what his cousin was planning. Kane, smiling, looks at his accomplice and whispers to him if he pretended well. The scoundrel, grinning, answers that everything was played out perfectly. He praises his ward for the fact that he perfectly created the appearance that the quarrel was started by Ghislaine, and this is more than enough for a duel. Kane reaches under the hem of his uniform. He thinks that the support promised to him should not be missed under any circumstances, and he must make a good impression.